My family thought I was poor. I wasn't, not by a long shot. They saw my small house.
My old car, the way I wore the same cardigan every week. They whispered behind my back. They laughed at my frugality. They thought I had nothing, and I let them think that. I smiled. I nodded. I played the harmless old grandma. But what I discovered next changed everything. I live alone now, in a quiet street lined with maples. My house is modest, yes. The garden is tidy, but not fancy. Inside, the furniture is simple, the curtains faded from sun. I keep to myself. I like it that way. Peaceful, predictable. But they don't see what's beneath the surface. They never looked closely. My eldest son, Robert, always thought he was smarter than everyone else. Big, broad-shouldered, confident, the kind of man who believes the world owes him respect. He calls me weekly, not to ask how I am, but to remind me of the family plan for the estate. Always pushing, always scheming. Then there's my daughter, Claire. She's quieter, subtler, smiles like sunshine but cuts like winter wind. I taught her everything she knows, and she thinks she can outsmart me. They all come around at holidays, birthdays, funerals, the usual gatherings. At first, I tried to keep up, played their games, laughed at their jokes, nodded at their complaints. They would gossip about cousins, friends, neighbors, and occasionally about me. She's always been frugal, probably has nothing left. Poor thing. I'd smile and sip my tea, letting the words slide off me. They never suspected that I've been quietly building, quietly saving, quietly investing. Every odd job, every rental, every secret bank account. They had no idea. I played the part of the frail, harmless old grandma perfectly, and it was fun to watch them underestimate me. Grandma always knew how to hide her strength. My husband passed years ago, and I inherited nothing immediately, just his memories, his old watch, a few dusty antiques. But I didn't despair. I planned, slowly, methodically. I turned tiny savings into larger ones, stocks into properties, small trust funds into a quiet empire no one would guess existed. And I never bragged, never showed off. Not once. I remember the last family dinner vividly. My children were all there. Robert, Claire, my youngest, Emily, who still thinks I'm a little soft in the head, and a handful of cousins who drifted in out of obligation. The food was simple: turkey with mashed potatoes, gravy slightly too salty. The table was crowded, conversations overlapping, voices rising. And there it was, the first jab. "Grandma, do you even know how to manage money these days?" Robert said. He leaned back, arms crossed, chest puffed like a king addressing a pauper. Everyone chuckled. I smiled. I let it pass. Claire added, "Mom's so old-fashioned. She probably still uses checks." Laughter. The youngest cousins giggled nervously, unsure whose side to take. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring every moment. Their cruelty was sharp, but so predictable. "Yes, I use checks," I said lightly. "And they work just fine." Robert scoffed. "Of course, you wouldn't understand the stock market, or taxes, or real estate." He laughed, and the room joined in. I could feel my blood simmering, but I didn't show it. The trick, I've learned, is patience. Let them think they've won. Let them think I'm small, weak, harmless. Let them look down on me. They're sloppy when they feel superior. Careless. That's when you strike. As the meal ended, they argued over seating arrangements for the next holiday. Who should host? Who should get what? I cleared the plates quietly. I watched. I cataloged every smirk, every roll of the eyes, every whispered insult, every slight. Every little betrayal from the past 20 years came rushing back. Who never called, who borrowed money and forgot to return it, who assumed I had nothing left to give. I remember Emily, my youngest. She's gentle, sweet, and always loyal to me. She caught my gaze across the table and gave a small, knowing nod. "Don't worry, Grandma," she whispered. I smiled back. She doesn't know the half of it. She doesn't know I've already won the first battle. The one about perception. After dinner, Robert and Claire lingered in the living room, voices low. I heard the words they didn't want me to hear. "She's not as rich as we think," Claire said. "She's old, probably senile. I say we push for control now, before she changes her mind." Robert laughed. "Sharp, cruel. We can't let her fool us. One wrong move and we miss out on everything." I froze for a heartbeat. Then I smiled. Slowly. That familiar, soft, harmless smile. They thought I hadn't heard. They thought I was fragile. They were wrong. And I started to plan. Days turned into weeks. I pretended to continue living the same quiet life. I watered my plants, dusted the shelves, hummed old songs from the radio. I let the whispers follow me. I let the laughter fade behind closed doors. And all the while, I was plotting, calculating, waiting. The cracks were showing, but not in me. In them. Their greed, their entitlement, their arrogance. It was palpable. I walked past mirrors, remembering the faces I once loved. Faces that now only reflected selfishness. And I felt a quiet fury rising inside me, a fury cold and sharp, like winter ice. I started small, checked my accounts, reviewed my investments. Each number made me smile. Each property deed reminded me that appearances are deceiving. They had no idea how deep the roots went, how long I had been quietly preparing. It all came together when I received the call from my lawyer. The old estate, untouched for decades, had matured. The trusts I had quietly funded for years were finally ready. All the pieces were in place. And suddenly, I could see it. The moment when they would realize just how wrong they were. The humiliation, the shock, the disbelief. It would be exquisite. But first, I had to wait. Patience, timing, drama. They had to be convinced of my weakness, my poverty, my insignificance. They had to believe they had won before I struck. And then, one crisp autumn afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. The kind of letter that makes your heart beat a little faster, even in your 70s. A formal notice from the estate lawyer, the will reading. The date was set. The time exact. Every family member would be there. I held the envelope in my hands. The paper felt heavier than it should. Heavier with promise. Heavier with truth. Heavier with the kind of revelation that changes everything. I could feel the smirks, the sneers, the dismissive laughter before it even happened. And it made me smile. I looked at the calendar, marked the day with a small, precise stroke of my pen. Then I walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. My children would come, my grandchildren, cousins, all of them. They would think they were stepping into an old lady's modest home, ready to claim what little she had left. They didn't know the truth, not yet. And that was when I realized everything was about to change. The day of the will reading arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air long before anyone stepped inside my little home. I brewed tea as usual, humming a quiet tune, pretending to myself that I was calm. But my heart raced. Every sound outside, the crunch of leaves, the click of shoes on pavement, made me think of them arriving. First came Robert, bursting through the door with his usual bravado, chest puffed, phone in hand, checking emails, checking nothing. "Grandma," he said, loud, almost theatrical. "Hope you've prepared for today. We wouldn't want any surprises." He smirked. That smirk. I smiled back politely. "Of course, Robert," I said softly. "I wouldn't dream of it." Claire arrived next, quiet but sharp. She hugged me lightly, lingering just a second too long, as if studying me. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and something else. Greed, no doubt. "Mom, everything ready for the reading?" she asked sweetly, her tone masking suspicion. I nodded. "Yes, everything is ready. Please, make yourselves comfortable." They all filed into the living room. Cousins, aunts, aunts' husbands, everyone who'd come out of some obligation or hope of inheritance. The air was thick with expectation and arrogance. They looked around, eyes grazing my modest furnishings, my worn carpets, my frayed sofa. Their expressions were a mixture of pity and amusement. The lawyer arrived, tall, sharp, efficient. He carried a thick envelope, and his eyes scanned the room carefully. "Shall we begin?" he asked. The family murmured agreement, shifting in their seats, adjusting collars, crossing arms like generals about to attack. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. Every glance toward me was a jab. Every whisper behind hands felt like a blade. Robert leaned forward. "So, Grandma," he said, "I suppose we'll see exactly what you left us. Or didn't leave us?" He laughed lightly. Claire joined him, her smile deceptively sweet. "We've been so patient, Mom. Can't wait to see if all those years of frugality were worth anything." I felt a pang, not of money lost. No, I was richer than they could ever dream, but of betrayal. How could my own children, the ones I raised, speak to me like this? The anger surged, hot and sharp, but I kept it hidden. I had to. Patience. Calm. Timing. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Before I read the will, there's an important matter." He looked directly at Robert and Claire. My children's faces tightened immediately. "There have been recent amendments to the estate," he continued, "and it appears some attempts were made to manipulate or misrepresent your mother's finances." Robert scoffed. "What do you mean?" His voice was a mix of fury and fear. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide. "Manipulate? Who would do that?" "I am afraid," the lawyer said, "that some family members believed the estate was smaller than it truly is, and may have acted accordingly." He opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, letting silence stretch between words. Eyes flicked to me. Murmurs erupted. "Mom, is this true?" Robert demanded. I just smiled faintly. The old, harmless smile, the one that had fooled them for decades. "I suppose you'll see," I said softly. The lawyer began naming the first assets. Small at first, an old rental property, a modest savings account. They laughed nervously. "See?" Robert said. "It's nothing, just as I thought." But the laughter died quickly as the next envelopes were opened. Multiple properties in prime locations, stocks, trusts, bank accounts. Claire's eyes widened. "Mom, this can't be real." Her voice cracked slightly. "We thought—" "Yes," I interrupted quietly, letting my words sink in. "You thought I was broke." Gasps. Murmurs. Robert's face flushed crimson. This isn't possible," he stammered. "You've been lying all this time." I shook my head, calm now, ice running through my veins. "No, I've been planning. Quietly, patiently. While you all assumed I had nothing, I was building. Preparing. watching, waiting. Their shock was exquisite. I almost savored it too much. Robert opened his mouth again, but the words failed him. Claire tried to compose herself. But you're hiding all this. You've been deceiving us? Mom, I don't. How could you? The betrayal didn't stop with money. As the lawyer continued, evidence surfaced that some family members had tried to forge signatures, manipulate accounts, or take advantage of my supposed weakness. Robert's attempts to pressure me for earlier access, Claire's subtle threats disguised as concern, all documented. I watched them unravel, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. Their faces, the smirks, the arrogance, replaced with confusion, disbelief, fury, humiliation. And through it all, I sat quietly, a small, serene storm. You've set us up, Robert spat finally, rage and fear tangled in his voice. This is revenge. It's cruel. I let out a small laugh, more like a sigh. Revenge? I said. No, Robert. This isn't revenge. It's truth. Claire, trembling, whispered, Mom, we didn't know. Didn't know? I repeated softly. You mocked me. You assumed I had nothing. You disrespected me, whispered behind my back, and made plans to steal from me. The room went silent. Even the cousins, who had stayed quiet, looked shocked. They had underestimated me. Every cruel word, every slight glance, every assumption of weakness. They had built their own trap. I could feel the anger and humiliation radiating from Robert and Claire. I had always known this day would come. I had always known they would reveal themselves if given the chance. And now, I watched them unravel. Mom, Claire said again, voice breaking. Please, we didn't mean to. I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. No explanations, no apologies. Actions have consequences. And now, you see them. It kept getting worse. Every envelope the lawyer opened brought a new shock. A new betrayal revealed. Cousins who had tried to sneak assets into their names. Distant relatives who had lied about debts. I had documented it all. Photographs, letters, legal filings, every sliver of their scheming exposed. Robert lunged at me, eyes wild. This isn't fair. You can't do this. I looked at him calmly. Oh, Robert, I've been doing this for years, and I've been patient, but you. I paused, letting the word hang in the air. You thought I was powerless. You thought I had nothing. And now you know how wrong you were. Claire sank into her chair, head in her hands. I can't believe this. Mom, we betrayed you. We betrayed you all along. Yes, I said, quiet but firm. And now you see what betrayal feels like. The lawyer closed the last envelope. The room was thick with silence. A silence that carried the weight of every slight, every insult, every underestimation. Their shock and humiliation were perfect. It was poetic, and I let them stew in it. I took a slow sip of tea, enjoying the bitter warmth. Every heartbeat, every tremor in their bodies was a reminder of the arrogance that had brought them here. They thought they were clever. They thought they were in control. They weren't. And as I looked around the room, I realized something important. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about being seen, acknowledged, and not underestimated. And today, they were learning the harshest lesson. The room was quiet now, except for Robert's sharp breathing and Claire's soft sobs. I could feel the tension crackling. Every eye was on me, every gaze filled with guilt, fear, disbelief. And I let the moment linger, savoring the delicious anticipation of what was coming next. Because this was only the beginning. The real reckoning, the revenge that would leave a mark beyond money, beyond humiliation, was just about to unfold. And I couldn't wait. After the will reading, I walked through my empty house in a daze. The echoes of their shocked voices still rattled in my ears. Robert's fury, Claire's tears, the stifled gasps of cousins. I could replay every moment like a cruel movie on loop. And yet, as much as I had relished seeing them stumble, I felt a hollow ache inside. It wasn't the money. No, the wealth was mine, untouchable, carefully built. It was the betrayal itself, the cold realization that the people I had nurtured, the children I had raised, had plotted, whispered, and schemed against me for years. They had underestimated me, they had mocked me, and for a brief moment, I had to admit, it hurt more than I expected. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window that overlooked the quiet street, and I let the silence sink in. Outside, the leaves fell lazily, ignoring the chaos in my heart. I had always been strong. I had always been clever. And yet, seeing their faces, hearing their voices, I realized just how deep the wounds ran. I felt small, vulnerable, broken, in a way I hadn't felt in decades. I had thought I was prepared, that I had control, but even I hadn't anticipated the rawness of betrayal, the sting of being disrespected by my own children. And in that quiet, empty room, I let myself feel it. Every slight, every cruel whisper, every insult they had thrown at me over the years. I could have given up. I could have packed a bag and walked away, letting them enjoy their shallow victory. But that wasn't me. Never me. Somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited, a whisper in the dark corners of my mind. They think this is over, but it's just beginning. I needed a plan, not a hasty one, not a moment of blind fury. Patience had served me well before. This time, it would serve me better. I started by reviewing everything: the will, the documents, the trust funds. Each number, each clause, each property held a story, a secret, a lever. Then, almost by accident, I discovered something. A letter tucked away in the old legal files, half forgotten. It detailed an additional clause in the estate, one that Robert and Claire hadn't noticed. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who skimmed the documents, but I saw it immediately. It allowed for discretionary redistribution of certain assets in the event of dishonesty or disrespect. In other words, the very attempts they had made to manipulate me, to belittle me, to assume my poverty, could work against them. The clause was like a key, and I had just found the lock. I felt a shiver of excitement. It was beautiful in its simplicity. I didn't have to fabricate evidence or make threats. The law itself, combined with my foresight, would do the work. I smiled, slowly, deliberately. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. But I couldn't do it alone. Not completely. I needed someone I could trust, someone who wouldn't be swayed by greed or fear. I thought of Emily, my youngest. She had always been loyal, kind, and clever in ways Robert and Claire had never noticed. She wouldn't betray me, and importantly, she could act as a subtle guide in orchestrating what was to come. I called her that evening. Her voice, sweet and tentative on the phone, was a balm to my bruised heart. "Emily," I said, letting the pause hang, "I need your help." There was a hesitation, a soft intake of breath. "Of course, Grandma. Anything." I explained the situation carefully, leaving out nothing, but speaking in a tone that conveyed calm authority. "They think I'm weak. They think I've nothing left. They don't know about the clauses, the accounts, the trusts. They don't know the truth, and I intend to make them see it, completely. But I need someone by my side, someone I can trust to handle the details discreetly. There was silence on the other end. Then Emily whispered, almost reverently, "I'll do it. I won't let them hurt you again." The knowledge that I wasn't alone in this made my heart steady. I wasn't just plotting revenge. I was reclaiming control. And control, as I had learned over a long life, was a far sweeter victory than anger alone. Over the next days, I watched them. Quietly, from a distance. I kept my usual routine: gardening, visiting the small market, reading letters, but I noted every interaction, every glance, every smug little movement. They had no idea I was observing, calculating, cataloging. Every arrogant smile became data, every whispered insult a note in my mental ledger. And the more I watched, the more the plot thickened. Robert and Claire weren't just greedy. They were careless. They made mistakes, small slips of language, misstatements about finances and properties. They assumed I hadn't noticed. I had noticed. Every slip became a building block in the structure I was quietly erecting, a structure that would collapse on them like a carefully stacked domino display. The tension inside me coiled tighter with each passing day. I felt alive, in a way I hadn't in years. The betrayal had cut deep, yes, but it had also lit a fire. And from that fire, a plan began to emerge. One part patience, one part strategy, one part cunning. I knew the exact moment I wanted to strike. The will reading had shaken them, humiliated them in public, yes. But there was more to come. They had underestimated my reach, my intelligence, and my capacity for subtlety. They had forgotten the lessons I had learned over a lifetime. I started preparing. Documents were organized, letters were drafted, and legal details double-checked. Emily helped discreetly, her presence a quiet reassurance. Each evening, I sat at my desk, reviewing notes, imagining reactions, rehearsing conversations. I became almost giddy with anticipation. The betrayal that had once crushed me was now the fuel for a meticulous, unstoppable plan. But I didn't rush. I never rushed. The best revenge I had learned was slow, precise, and undeniable. They would see it coming only when it was too late. The humiliation, the shock, the realization of their errors, all of it would unfold perfectly. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still, I whispered to myself, softly, almost like a prayer, "You thought I was powerless. You thought I had nothing. Soon you will understand, and it will be beautiful." It was in that moment, sitting alone with the letter in my hands, the plan forming, Emily quietly at my side, that I realized something profound. Betrayal had brought me to the lowest point of my life. It had made me question, made me hurt, but it had also given me clarity, purpose, and an opportunity that was too perfect to ignore. I would rise. And when I did, they would finally learn the consequences of underestimating me. The spark had been struck, the path laid out, and the countdown had begun. The day finally arrived. I had been waiting for this moment for years, quietly, patiently, meticulously. The family gathered again, this time at the lawyer's office, under the pretense of finalizing some administrative matters. They thought they were coming to claim a few modest surprises. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I walked in, calm, composed, a small smile playing on my lips. Emily trailed slightly behind me, discreet, vigilant. The room was filled with familiar faces: Robert, Claire, cousins, aunts, distant relatives who had long assumed I was a powerless old woman. They greeted me with polite smiles, the kind that barely concealed their anticipation of disappointment. Robert's chest puffed with his usual arrogance. "Mom," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "I hope this isn't going to take too long. We have places to be." Claire gave me a quick, forced smile, her eyes darting to the envelopes on the lawyer's desk. Everyone assumed they had the upper hand. The lawyer opened the meeting with formalities, speaking slowly, deliberately. "Before we begin, there are a few important clarifications regarding the estate. Some recent amendments have been overlooked and must now be addressed." I watched their faces closely, eyebrows raised, fingers tightened around chair arms. Their sense of superiority began to falter. "You see," I said softly, almost to myself, "all those little assumptions you made about me, the underestimations, they were your undoing." The first envelopes were opened. Small properties, modest accounts. They muttered, trying to sound unimpressed. But I saw the first flickers of doubt in their eyes. Then, one by one, the big reveals came. Prime real estate, lucrative investments, trusts accumulating interest over decades. Each one more than enough to wipe the smug smiles off their faces. Claire gasped. This can't be real." Robert's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since his teenage years. "You've been hiding all of this from us?" I leaned back in my chair, calm, composed. "Hiding? No, I was preparing, planning, and watching. You see, patience is a skill, one you never learned." Then came the clause, the secret clause. I had Emily quietly pass the letter to the lawyer. He cleared his throat, reading it aloud. Every word landed like a hammer. "In the event of intentional disrespect, deception, or manipulation toward the estate or its trustee, assets may be redistributed at the discretion of the trustee." The room froze. Eyes widened. Breath caught. Robert sputtered, That's, you can't." "Oh, I can," I said softly. "And I just did." The lawyer began redistributing assets according to the clause. Cousins who had tried to claim properties fraudulently were cut entirely. Robert and Claire were forced to forfeit portions they had schemed to gain. Every attempt at manipulation, every whisper behind my back, every greedy thought, they were exposed. Public, undeniable humiliation. Robert's face went pale. "Mom, this isn't fair," he shouted. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the desk. We didn't mean—" "You underestimated me," I interrupted. Voice calm, precise. "You assumed I was powerless. You assumed I had nothing. And now, you are learning what it feels like to be wrong. Completely wrong." I watched as the room shifted. Gasps, murmurs, and stunned silence filled the space. I could see some of them struggling with the realization of their arrogance, the exposure of their greed. Emily smiled faintly, proud, relieved. She had witnessed every careful move, every measured word. The beauty of it wasn't just the financial victory. No, it was the poetic justice. Those who had mocked my frugality, sneered at my old clothes, dismissed my intelligence, were now humbled. Their superiority crumbled before them. Their own actions, their own betrayals, became the instruments of their downfall. Robert attempted to argue, You can't take it all. There are laws, legal loopholes." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "You acted foolishly. The law is clear. Your arrogance blinded you. And now, justice, slow and patient, has done its work." Claire sat down abruptly, shoulders slumping. "Mom, we betrayed you. We didn't think you'd—" Yes, I said quietly, savoring the words. And now you see the consequences. Actions have weight, and they always catch up. There were subtle smiles, small sighs of disbelief from other relatives who had expected a weak, frail woman to be unable to protect herself. Their shock was delicious. The karmic symmetry of it all made my heart swell, not with cruelty, but with satisfaction. The fallout extended beyond the office. Cousins called to apologize, some too late, some grudgingly. A few disappeared entirely, ashamed or unwilling to face the consequences of their actions. But I remained untouched, elegant in my calm, basking in the quiet triumph. I had been betrayed, humiliated, dismissed, and yet I stood stronger than ever. The very tools of deception my children had tried to wield against me became the instruments of their undoing. Every arrogant glance they had once thrown at me came back, reflected, magnified, undeniable. And Emily? She stayed by my side, a quiet witness to justice. Mom, she whispered later as we left the office, I never doubted you. I knew you had this. I smiled at her. No one ever doubts patience, especially not me. We walked home in silence, the air crisp, the sky painted with fading autumn light. I felt lighter, freer, unburdened. The betrayal that had once cut deep had been transformed. Not by anger, not by revenge for its own sake, but by clever, deliberate action. The lesson had been taught. That night, I sat by the fire, reflecting on the day. The world outside my window seemed quieter, more respectful. I had turned humiliation into triumph, deceit into revelation, arrogance into lesson. And I understood fully the power of patience, intelligence, and timing. The family had learned a hard truth. Never underestimate a grandmother who smiles too quietly, who appears small, who seems powerless. Appearances, after all, are deceiving. And in that quiet moment, I realized something essential. Revenge, when executed with precision, need not be cruel to be devastating. It need only be just, inevitable, and perfectly timed. They had underestimated me. They had mocked me. They had plotted against me, and now they were humbled. I poured myself a cup of tea and sipped slowly, savoring the silence. Outside, the world continued, oblivious. Inside, I felt complete. Victory wasn't loud. It was precise. It was quiet. It was unforgettable. And it was mine. After the storm of revelations, the house felt different, lighter, quieter. The tension that had clung to the walls for decades had finally been released. I walked through each room, my steps echoing softly on the hardwood floors. And I realized something profound. I had reclaimed my life. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sneers, they were all behind me now. Robert and Claire had learned, the hard way, that arrogance and greed are dangerous companions. And I had been transformed, not just vindicated, but empowered, stronger, wiser, patiently victorious in a way they could never comprehend. The world seemed to look at me differently after that day. Neighbors whispered, not in mockery, but in quiet respect. Some of the cousins who had disappeared returned, sheepish, careful, humbled. Even the distant relatives who had once assumed I was powerless now approached with deferential smiles, a recognition of the strength they had underestimated. I spent the next few weeks quietly organizing my life. Emily and I took long walks through the park, talking softly about things other than betrayal and money, books, flowers, the coming winter. I discovered that freedom tastes sweeter than I had imagined. Freedom from worry, from deceit, from the burden of hiding strength. I could move through the world at my own pace, unafraid, unchained. Robert tried to call, of course. One morning, his number flashed across my phone. I stared at it for a long moment, remembering the arrogance in his voice, the smugness that had filled every family gathering. I let it ring. Then I let it ring again. And again. Eventually, the line went silent. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The lesson had been taught. He had lost everything. Claire tried later, timidly, carefully. She sent messages, apologies wrapped in excuses. "Mom, I realize now that I was wrong. Can we talk?" I read them, one by one, feeling the faint sting of old maternal affection. And then I deleted them. Compassion didn't mean restoring trust to those who had repeatedly shown contempt. Their opportunity had passed. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. I took up gardening again, coaxing late autumn roses to bloom against the frost. I spent mornings reading in the sunlight, afternoons baking small treats for Emily and the neighbors, evenings sipping tea by the fire. Simple pleasures, yes, but richer than anything Robert or Claire could have imagined. I had built wealth, yes, but also serenity, control, respect. I realized, too, that the revenge had been more than financial. It had been poetic. Every sneer, every belittling remark, every plan they had made against me had turned against them. They had walked into the trap of their own arrogance. They had expected to find a frail, powerless grandmother, and instead, they encountered strategy, intelligence, and timing. Their downfall was entirely of their own making, and that made it all the sweeter. Emily often sat by me during these quiet moments. She understood what I had done, why, and how. "You didn't just win, Mom," she said one evening, as we watched the sunset streak the sky with gold and crimson. "You taught them a lesson they'll never forget." I nodded, feeling a deep, satisfying calm. "Yes," I said softly. "And sometimes, Emily, the best revenge isn't anger. It's patience. Quiet, deliberate, unstoppable patience." The world outside seemed different, too. I moved through it with a subtle confidence, one that wasn't about showing off, but about knowing the truth. I had learned something essential. Appearances deceive. Those who underestimate you, those who assume weakness, are often their own undoing. And now my family knew this truth firsthand. There were no more whispered conversations behind my back, no more assumptions about my poverty or insignificance. The very house that had once seemed ordinary, modest, even fragile, now carried the weight of power and control. I had transformed it, not physically, but in the eyes of those who had doubted me. I walked past the fireplace one evening, staring at the photographs of younger days, photos of Robert as a child, smiling innocently, Claire holding my hand, Emily looking up at me with admiration, memories of love and warmth. And I felt it, strength tempered by clarity. I could honor the past without letting it bind me. I could acknowledge betrayal without letting it define me. And then I remembered the most satisfying moment of all. Robert, in that office, standing there with his face flushed, realizing that everything he had schemed for had crumbled. That smug arrogance, that sense of superiority, it evaporated instantly. And I whispered to myself, quietly, as though savoring the memory for eternity, and that was the day he realized he'd lost everything. From that day forward, life took on a slower, sweeter rhythm. My mornings were mine, my afternoons my own. The quiet streets became my sanctuary, the garden my refuge, and the simple act of sipping tea a meditation in triumph. I didn't need to flaunt my victory. It was mine, unassailable, undeniable, complete. Occasionally, I receive letters from distant relatives or old friends, asking for advice, guidance, or simply to check in. And now, the words carry weight. They know they are addressing someone who has endured betrayal, emerged stronger, and reclaimed her dignity. Respect comes naturally when it is earned, not demanded. And as for my parents, they call me every week now. Their voices are soft, tentative, tinged with awe, perhaps tinged with the fear of their own past misjudgments. And I never answer. Some lessons are too powerful to explain. Some victories are too sweet to revisit with apologies or explanations. They learned at last, not by words, but by the undeniable truth of my life. I've learned something else too. Revenge, when patient, precise, and deserved, can be transformative. It doesn't just punish, it clarifies, teaches, and restores. It reminds us that strength isn't always loud, that power isn't always visible, that respect, once earned, is permanent. I sit now in my favorite chair, by the window that overlooks the quiet street. The sun sets, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. I sip my tea, smiling faintly, quietly. Life is full. Life is just. And life, for me, has finally found its balance. Because in the end, power is not about force. It is about knowledge, patience, and timing. And I have all three. I look out the window, at the leaves falling in slow, deliberate patterns, and I know this truth. I am no longer underestimated. I am no longer overlooked. I am free. I am respected. And I have learned finally that some victories are best savored in silence. The house is quiet. The garden is still. The world outside moves on, oblivious. And I sit here, knowing one simple, undeniable fact. I have won. And that is enough.